Sadashiva Samarambam Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmadacharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam Ishvaro Guratmeti Murti Veda Vipagine Vyomavda Vyapta Dehaya Dakshinamurtaye Namaha Savavedanta Sedanta Gocharam Tamagocharam Govindam Paramanatam Satiguru Pranatoshmaham Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Okay, so here it comes, Claudio. And hi, Claudio. And we begin today from the verse 5, Drg Drsya-Viveka. As we have agreed today, we do Drg Drsya. It's on timing. So this consciousness, verse 5. We have the text that Claudio has compiled with verse only.
I don't think we finished verse 4, but I could be wrong. I thought we were at sort of in the first paragraph on page 9, but I may be
on page 9. Okay, then let's look into it. Maybe you are correct. So the verse 4 says that consciousness remaining the same illumines the thoughts, and the thoughts, as we know, they have feelings, emotions, and sensations attached to them. Because every thought it is not different than the object, and the object mentally or physically appears, and then the mind goes there, and then immediately there is a sensation. A sensation is a function of our ragas and diversions that's going to make us feel either attracted or repulsed or something in between, all sorts of combinations of emotions. So consciousness remaining the same illumines the thoughts, and the thoughts are going to produce emotions, sensations such as desire, doubt, belief, willingness, fortitude, lack of fortitude, modesty, understanding, fear, desire, many others. So that is, he begins describing consciousness, and as we know, consciousness is the true absolute seer, illuminer. It's consciousness that is that which illumines, that which sees and is not seen, illumines and is not illumined, knows and it's not known except known by itself, as self-knowledge. Okay, let's see here. The mind goes through different emotional conditions, as we know. There are several cognition conditions of the mind, like knowledge and ignorance, partial knowledge and partial ignorance, doubt, and so on. These various conditions of the mind are experienced by something other than the mind, as we know. What is the proof that they are experienced? If they were not experienced, we will never be talking about those mental conditions, even intellectual conditions. What I know, what I don't know, what I know, but not really much. So partial knowledge, partial ignorance, and so on, doubts. All of that is to point out that the conditions of the mind, which includes the intellect as well, unknown, and it is known by consciousness, as we know, which is not an experiencing entity, but it is the absolute seer, the absolute illuminator, the absolute witnesser, witnessing principle. And we know that all those mental, intellectual conditions are experienced. Why? Because we talk about that. I found that very nice, that piece of evidence there. Even though we experience these variety of conditions and they are known to us, Bradaranyaka Upanishad enumerates them in the first chapter. The author borrows from that enumeration a list and presents this list in this verse, talking about desire, making plans to implement the desire, doubt as to whether the plan will be successful or not, faith in the guru and the scriptures, which is a spiritual kind of faith. So all this list, it was borrowed or extracted by Bradaranyaka Upanishad. All these conditions of the mind are illumined and made known by the absolute seer, meaning to say consciousness, while itself remains changeless and unseen by any other factor. It's like the light pervading the room. Wherever be the movement of the hand or the body, the light falls over the body and makes the body known or seen. The movement belongs to the body, but the light itself does not belong to the body. So the seen and the seer, they belong to two different suborder of reality, let's say. Now we see the realm of those relative seers. As we know, the relative seers are those aspects of our equipment of knowledge experience that sees, illumines something, but it's illumined because that illumination is not self-contained. It receives from this other principle. Then we have this condition of which consciousness illumines and remains itself changeless and free, enjoying this independence because it's self-luminous, self-conscious, and so on. All these conditions are seen and known by the mind. Whatever moves in a room, in the analogy of the light in the room, whatever moves in the room is revealed by the light. The light and the hand of someone moving like that, they do not belong to the same order in that sense, okay? Because the light is there pervading the entire room, and the hand, it's going to be known and revealed only in the presence of light. If we turn off the light, the hand is not perceived and known. So the hand depends on the light. The light does not depend on the hand, because the light is going to shine regardless of whatsoever is in its spectrum and whatever is moving in there. Whatever movement of the hand, the light falls over and makes the body known or seen. The movement belongs to the body, but the light itself does not move, but it almost appears that if it is moving. So it's more evident in the case of the light of consciousness. It appears to be moving and doing things, revealing, and so on. As the mind moves, we have the impression the consciousness moves. As the mind sees, we have the impression that the consciousness is doing something, is an act of seeing. But no, consciousness in its very nature and presence reveals, illumines and reveals, and things are known. But as we know, it requires the human intellect to effectively experience and know. The light cannot move also because the light is pervading the entire room. So another nice concept, beautiful. The purna nature of consciousness, the purna nature of light. So whatsoever pervades everything is beyond time and space. Because time and space, is something that comes as a dualistic phenomenon in which there is many plurality of factors, plurality of objects, and then we have separations and distance and different properties, and then we have time and space. But from the standpoint of light pervading the entire room or space, pervading the entire room as well, so there is no question of space because it is non-dual, relatively speaking, within the context of a room with the lights on. Similarly, consciousness spreads over the mind and illumines the conditions of the mind. Consciousness is going to shine and reveals the mind, reveals the thoughts, reveals the objects, reveals the emotions and feelings. Consciousness is there, shining, illumining the mind, and then the mind, the original mind is going to illumine the thoughts and the object and the emotions as well. All the conditions of the mind. Thus, the Shaitanian consciousness called Chit. Chit is the conscious aspect of Brahman. Sat is the existence aspect of Brahman. This conscious aspect of Brahman called Chit, the power of knowingness, knowledge, of conscious intelligence. This Shaitanian aspect of Brahman called Chit in this verse is the seer number 3, is the absolute seer, which sees the mind and then sees, the mind sees the sense organs, and the sense organs illumines the physical body, making the instruments of experience see the world and hear the world and so on. Consciousness illumines without any movement, will or change. So this is again highlighting the akarta nature of consciousness, of ourselves. That's that aspect within our human experience that does not move. And being akarta, is it able to do any action? How can something that is absolutely akarta do any action? How can something that's one without a second do any action? So consciousness without any movement, any desire, or any possibility of change, is the one that illumines the equipment and the world. That consciousness is not as well part, product, or property of the mind. This is a general, very common misunderstanding. The idea that consciousness is a byproduct of matter, and science believes that somehow it comes out of the brain, the body, matter. So matter, which is inert, should produce something as sentience, intelligence, knowingness, which seems to be absurd, even if we don't take into account the teachings of the Vedas and Vedanta. So it's not property of the mind. Consciousness is not part, byproduct, or property of matter / energy. Mind is made out of subtle matter, or energy. So it's not a property of matter or energy. Mind, consciousness, is an independent entity that pervades and illumines the mind. So the mind now is is receiving the blessing of consciousness and becoming self-conscious and conscious of its environment. But those are a description of the 5 features of consciousness, which sometimes is presented as the 5 features of existence as well. And I have seen even the 5 features of Ananda as well, because it's the 5 features of Brahman, the 5. So that consciousness is not part, so on. It's not limited by the boundaries of the mind. So sometimes we say that consciousness is not part of matter. Sometimes it's not part of mind, which is energy, which is a kind of matter as well, inert. In this case, we are analyzing these features of consciousness in analogy or comparing it with the mind. The mind, as we know, it's not limitless. It's not part, product, or property of the mind. It is an independent entity that pervades and illumines the mind. It's not limited by the boundaries of the mind. So now we are looking at mind and seeing that the mind is an entity. It's a reflection that occurs in the substantial nature of mind itself, and then it shines with whatsoever it knows. And then there is a limitation on what a certain mind knows, and then there is a limitation. There are some boundaries, mental boundaries. I mean, I have some boundaries. I don't know so many things, and those are boundaries. So my mind has knowledge up to this and that, and there are boundaries to the mind. So it's not limited by the boundaries of the mind. It survives even in the physical body. We say it survives when the physical body dies. Here we say it's not limited by the boundaries of the mind. In the absence of the mind, meaning to say in deep sleep, in deep sleep, this consciousness survives in deep sleep when the mind is absolutely resolved. Now we are analyzing these 5 features compared to the mind. But consciousness in sleep is not available because the medium called the mind is not available either. It's absent. So we say that it's not part, product, or property. We say that it's not limited by the boundaries of the mind. We say that it goes beyond the boundaries of the mind, and we can present the argument that consciousness is well and present during the deep sleep when the mind is resolved. And then not only that, we say that, but in the absence of a medium, consciousness is not very verifiable. Okay, it cannot be seen by inference. Of course, we cannot see mind, we cannot see subtle matter, we cannot see consciousness, which is the most subtle of subtle, but we see the effects of this consciousness. We see the effects of consciousness in the mind, in the awakened state. Why? Because the mind is doing its thing, it's feeling and thinking, determining, and then we see, there is consciousness there. But when someone goes into coma or in deep sleep, we don't have any evidence that the mind is there, except for taking the temperature of the body and observing if the vital air is still moving in and out. But otherwise, there is no evidence. But consciousness is always there, even when the mind is resolved. This pure, independent consciousness is the seer number 3, or the absolute seer. The absolute seer is the one that is a seer, but it's not seen. of the other seers, they are double agents. So they, one aspect, they are the seer, but from another angle, they are seen. So not the case with consciousness. Is the seer number 3. What is the nature of this seer number 3, the absolute seer? This seer 3 is unlike the other 2 seers. It is ever the seer and never the seen, as I said. So the characteristic of the seer number 3 is the fact that it is a light that sees, illumines, reveals, and sees, which is self-contained and self-luminous and self-independent, because it does not need another source of light, and it cannot be seen. There is no other conscious principle, borrowing consciousness to consciousness exists, to Brahman. Brahman has its own source of conscious existence, right? So that is the difference. It's ever this, like all the others, it's ever the seer, never the seen. It's ever the experiencer and never the experienced. And then there we are in trouble again. Oh no, but it's, the Dante sometimes says that consciousness can be experienced. Yes, can be experienced, but cannot be seen or experienced objectively. It is experienced as the subject, the absolute seer, the absolute illuminator, without which there is no way you can see, experience, and know anything. So there is nothing more obvious and clear that we experience consciousness 24/7. Without consciousness, we cannot experience the world. In order to experience the world, we need to experience consciousness first. But consciousness can only be experienced as the very nature of the mind, the intellect, because it is the ultimate or the absolute subject or seer. The seer that cannot be seen, the seer that cannot be experienced, the seer, the illuminator that cannot be illuminated, and also the knower that cannot be known. How about that? Again, the knower that cannot be known. It's not an object of knowledge as well. Why? Because it's the very source of knowingness, of conscious intelligence. So if it is the very source, so it is just beyond this reflected knowledge we experience as Jivatmas. So therefore, it cannot be known in the light of the human intellect. It cannot be known because it is sattva, is the very source, and it cannot be known that way, but it can be known at the same time, because the Jivatma needs to understand what its true nature / identity is. So and then he can understand consciousness. I cannot really know it as an object, but I know it as my very nature or absolute subject nature. Isn't it clear, Claudio? You have any doubt? Can I send you that certificate of Yana? I'll say
Not yet.
so.
But it starts to be very, very clear. It starts to
Very,
be
very clear. So the first step, first step is no. We're gonna wait for the certificate, definitely. But the first step is to understand that you experience consciousness all the time. You understand? It's integral part of your human experience, and the same thing, your existence. You cannot deny your existence. And then you have to make peace with the idea that this consciousness which seems to be your nature, and this existence, which seems to be your nature, is also of the nature of limitlessness. And then in order to embrace the limitless nature of the Jiva-Atma needs to see itself no longer as the body-mind, needs to see itself as this light of conscious existence. You know, this is the last 1/3 to be claimed. Then a certificate is going to become, but it's going to be digital, because nowadays one should never look for the experience of self-consciousness. When we say that we do not have the experience of the self-consciousness, we make a blunder of thinking that one day we'll get that experience in future. And this indicates that we think that Atma, we still think that Atma can be experienced as an object. Understand? So it's never experienced. We should never look for consciousness objectively, because what is the seeker of truth, the seeker of moksha, is the one who is seeking search for consciousness, and wants to experience, wants to really understand and claim it to be its true nature. And then we need to put our mind on consciousness to try to understand it and see if we really like it, and if we want to allow this shift of identity. So from ignorance to jnana. So, and then we need to think about it, we need to look into it, we need to come to a point to get familiarized with it. This all brings the idea of objectification toward consciousness, so that I can be a good friend to consciousness. So all of that, it's very subtle, but it gives us a sense that consciousness may be in the future, not now. You will meet it face to face, like in my prayers I used to say, so now I know, but yet I need to have a last proof. Now I want to meet you face to face, my last prayers. And then somehow the Lord helped me to understand that that was impossible, because there is only one face of consciousness. The author says that there is no such a thing as an experience of consciousness, because consciousness is ever the experiencer. So in fact, we can never experience consciousness. We can infer the presence of consciousness, but we can also experience consciousness younger, older son, which is reflected consciousness. So we don't experience consciousness itself, but we experience reflected consciousness, because consciousness, when it reflects in the human subtle body, it produces knowingness, sentience, and the sentience there is going to be conditioned depending on the proportions of the gunas and so on, and the elements. So we're going to have this changing experience of consciousness depending on the predominance of those proportions. So generally speaking, it's said that it's easier to reflect consciousness when the mind is very sattvic, because when it's very sattvic, it shines as bliss and peace, and satisfaction. And those qualities often associate to our true nature, satisfaction and limitlessness, peace, and so. But in fact, we experience consciousness even when the mind is more rajasic. The only difference that is consciousness is not going to taste as sweet. but you experience reflect consciousness. And tamasic mind as well is going to give us the experience of reflected consciousness on a medium, which is under the influence of tamas. But consciousness is going to be shining there regardless of the nature. And this is a very simple experience that we can verify. Now, we all experience the reflection of consciousness, and by inference, we can say, yes, I know consciousness because I experience its reflection. The same way we say, I know sunlight because I have a mirror that somehow bounces the light coming from the sun and illumines my living room. Therefore, I know that the sun is shining. I know that there is such a thing, without which I could not read in my living room, for example. So we can never say there is no such a thing as the experience of consciousness, because consciousness is ever the experiencer. Consciousness is self-evident experiencer, and there it's another thing, it's self-evident. And that is something that we can never experience, but we can infer its presence, because without it, there is no Chidabhasa, or reflected consciousness. You cannot be a reflected consciousness or Jiva Atma if there is no Atma producing this Jiva Atma. There must be the absolute Atma, Paramatma, so that I can enjoy the status of Jiva Atma. Atma must be there before the reflection. Consciousness, Atma, is our higher component. So we're going to see in this, what is a Jiva is a composition of several seers, being the first one the absolute seer and the others relative seers, right? So this consciousness is self-evident. This is explained in the next verse that says that consciousness is our higher component, our superior nature. To use the language of the 7th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Atma is para prakriti, it's the absolute prakriti, it's the true prakriti. It's not real Atma, it's not prakriti, but we say para, meaning to say the true, the absolute nature, the true nature of any prakriti, of any energy is Brahman, is the self, is Satchitananda. That's what it is. Anything from you guys? Some rain is coming here. The verse number 5. This consciousness does not rise, meaning to say is unborn, and does not set, it does not die, is immortal. It does not increase or decay. There is no light increasing or light diminishing or increasing. There is no variation in consciousness. It does not come, does not go. It is never born. It's beyond time. It is beyond death. It's beginningless and endless, forever consciousness, the only reality. It does not increase, it does not decay and die, and it is immutable. Immutable is a beautiful word. It does not decay. So meaning to say it does not, is never born to grow and then start, the curve, by which everything goes south, as James likes to say. Oh, here in Mitya, it's a big trouble because everything is going south. Because anything that's create, it's create, and then you buy a new laptop, and then I say, okay, now I feel safe and secure with it. And then after a few years, it starts going south, because everything that is created is bound to get old and decay and die. But consciousness is not subject to change, is not subject to decay. This consciousness shines by itself. It does not borrow any light from any other principle. This consciousness shines by itself and it illumines others without any help and without any action, without any desire, no intent, And how come it illumines and reveals everything if it has no desire to do so? What do you think, Claudio? So Brahman is there as consciousness, and it has no intent, no desire. It's the most lazy principle, and yet,
I was only thinking to imagine. I was trying to imagine the consciousness that has no desire, no action, because it was all pervasive. But then I go back to the Panchadasi when we say that consciousness is not space. So I get a little bit so realizing but it is not space. So it's not something physical. It's not something big, as we say. So I was trying to imagine all this thing. But in a sense, it's true because it's all pervasive. It desire. It don't do anything. So in some way.
Anything from Lynn or Mark?
Sorry, I missed the context of what you were saying then, Arlindo, because I just had to leave the room quickly. So
okay, now we are talking about you, consciousness, and we were talking that you illumines and reveals everything, and you are so lazy that you do not do anything, and you don't use the aid of anything, without any aid, without any doing. You shine and illumines everything. And how can it be possible? Why Brahman can do this without doing anything? How can it possible to do something without doing?
Yeah, it's a miracle. It's incredible. Yeah, it's wonderful.
I was thinking it's like by its presence alone, all this illumination and everything is experienced, but really it doesn't illumine anything because there's nothing other than it. So it's really gorgeous. The whole scheme they're setting up, it with your koshas and the bodies and the seers and the scene, it's just so rich and gorgeous, this explication of apparent experience. Just lovely. Thank you.
So the point here is, how can consciousness shine and illumines and reveals everything without doing anything? So we do things in duality, and consciousness, as Lynn is pointing out, is one without a second. Therefore, it does not do anything. But the reason by which consciousness illumines and reveals everything without doing anything, it is because it is in its nature to shine. So the nature of something is something that we don't need to do anything to maintain that thing, because it's our nature. You understand? So consciousness is of the nature of chit. Chit is knowingness, is consciousness. Okay. So the very nature of consciousness is going to illumine nitya, illumine the world. You understand? So it is the only source of illumination. And it does so because its nature is luminosity. So if its nature was not luminosity, and then what it would have to do, it would turn the switch on. Oh, it did something, it turned its switch on. and he was getting this light from a different grid, power grid. But no, it's self-contained, there is no switch, and then it illumines everything because it is its nature. Its nature is light. It's nature. So it's a light that cannot be turned off, switched off. So do we need to do something to switch myself off? On? No. So and then I can't turn myself off as well, because we are talking about one's fundamental nature, that without which I am not what I am. You understand fundamental nature, Claudio? So therefore, consciousness is a kata, and we can put it to test in our very experience, and then we can see that these relative seers, they all the time changing and modifying with experience, because in Nietzsche, everything changes and modifies. But there is this subject witnessing conscious principle that does not change, not even intensity or anything, as we will see here. Okay. Here, the author talks about the nature of consciousness. It's introducing ourselves to our nature as Chit. What was presented here as the 5 features of consciousness earlier is beautifully summarized again here. This consciousness, the seer number 3, does not rise, nor it is born. So it means to say it's beyond time and space. It does not have a beginning in time, creation, therefore it's never born. I mean, every Jiva Atma begins as a small little babe, and it's born out of a womb in a certain date, in a certain place. So it's not the case of consciousness. It was never created, because it's beyond Maya. Maya and Shwara bring these objects into creation. Therefore, it does not end either, and it can never be destroyed, and it cannot be transformed, because we see Nietzsche, we know that matter and energy cannot be destroyed, but it's all the time transformed, recycled. But consciousness is not subject to this recycling, to this change. Never destroyed consciousness, never not present. Thus, consciousness is not bound by time. This is a very important teaching, because according to science, consciousness is a byproduct of matter in time. They believe that, oh no, the world was created by God, and then the elements and the energies, and then they start creating this production line of objects that are all the 5 elements and the energies and so on. And then all these organisms, they begin growing, created, and then at certain point, we have intelligent living organism. And then at certain point, this intelligent living organism, they become, really intelligent with a sophisticated reflecting medium, the subtle body. And then the human consciousness, the human mind comes into play. So it is an object that is no longer just a program responding to the stimulus coming from its environment, but processing those inputs, and trying to learn from that interaction. We call that consciousness. Science believes that that's consciousness. And then, of course, the mind is not consciousness. The mind changes, but consciousness does not change. So there is this huge confusion between these 2 principles. Science believes that consciousness comes from matter. It says that matter evolves, and we can see that matter is that which is in a constant flux of change. We can say that it evolves or it adapts to its environment, you understand? Because we observe nature, we see that everything is changing. We believe that it's an evolution, but it's maybe better seen as adaptation of this phenomenon of configurations coming out of the 5 elements, you know. So we see that matter evolves as it combines and creating forms, and life originates in those living organisms. Science says that life is consciousness, or life, or better said, science says that consciousness, I mean, the miracle of life. Yeah? What is the miracle of life? What is this God particle? No? This consciousness, you know, and this intelligence. So life says that consciousness originates in time. But Vedanta says that science talks of as origination of consciousness is only the origination of the Chidabhasa. No? Chidabhasa. The origination at the beginning of the Chidabhasana is something that occurs in time. Okay, what is the Chidabhasana? Chidabhasana is the reflected consciousness. Reflect consciousness come into play within the scope of Maya. When Maya starts, you know, bringing about all these objects, and then again, consciousness being the source of knowledge and existence, you know, conceiving itself into every one of these objects created by Maya Shwara. And then when the subtle body is properly developed, and then this Chidabhasa begins in time, because Chidabhasa or Jivatma is a byproduct of Maya. Maya needs to cook up these elements in a way. I say, okay, now we have the 5 elements being expressed in all kinds of configurations and names and forms, but it's nothing. It's nothing. Names were not there, just colors and forms, beautiful and all this. You say, okay, this is nothing. I need to have an organism that can be the agent to enjoy and experience and know this universe. And then, boom, the Chidabhasa comes, but Chidabhasa is reflected consciousness. It's not the original consciousness. Original consciousness is beyond time and beyond death. It's that which is always ever present. And then he say here, the Vedanta says that science talking about origination of consciousness is a mistake, because the origination that they mean to say is the origination of the human mind. Okay, human mind comes in time, but consciousness is that beginningless principle in which time and space unfolds when Maya brings about the Chidabhasa. Chidabhasa is the one who's going to project time and space. Shwara is going to project the elements and mix them up and make it very colorful. And then the Chidabhasa, which is reflect consciousness, is going to create time and create space. You understand that, Claudio? So what is time and what is space? And how so it depends on the Chidabhasa.
This is a topic maybe that I have to hear again, because I don't...
Yeah, because just imagine the universe without the Chidabhasa, the experiencing agent. It is just, it's just matter energy. All objects are there, they are very beautiful. They are different forms and colors, but there is no agent to experience that. And then there are not even names and properties really determined. We don't know what for this universe. And then there is the Jiva Atman, the Chidabhasa reflect consciousness. And then this reflect consciousness sees things and say, wow, this is amazing. wow, and look at that one. Yeah? And then he say like, wow, I don't know, but I like both. Let me go from here, there to smell that flower and compare with this flower. And then as it goes from here, there, he established, for the first time, he established time and space. Yeah? Because otherwise, the universe is just flat thing. But the moment that Jiva Atma start contacting these objects, and then it becomes three-dimensional and becomes spacious, and then we keep creating all these timelines and so on. So it is the Chidabhasa that is going to begin. And when Chidabhasa comes into the scene, the creation, it's going to be helping Shwara to sustain this universe, because it keeps reinforcing reality in this projection and providing Shwara with desires and desires and desires for more, because Shwara is going to produce these configurations only to the extent that the jivas have desire for more. If jiva says, no, no more, no more, no more, and then the universe would collapse. So jivas are, Chidabhasas are co-creators and co-sustainers of this universe in that sense. When matter forms in a proper configuration, then we have the 5 elements, and then they grossify, and then they start making these different configurations. When matter forms and develops an ideal configuration, which means to say reflecting mediums, the subtle bodies of all sorts of different jivas. When matter, Ishwara, playing with this, start evolving or changing things, and then an intelligent living organism comes, which means to say an object with 3 bodies, an object with mind, an object with a subtle body that somehow shines with consciousness. So consciousness is not doing anything, it's providing my Ishwara with the tools, with the prakriti, with nature, with the energies, and then actually it's enough. It produces sattva guna, Maya produces sattva guna, and then Ishwara start, making his miracle, to create all these different configurations, and then an ideal configuration comes into play, and then begins reflected consciousness. So reflected consciousness is something, it's always there, but it only shines on the subtle body. It's there, but it's going to shine every time it comes, and then it pervades the subtle body. Sometimes I playfully, I say that it has incredible affection with subtle bodies, and then every time it comes in contact with subtle bodies, and then consciousness becomes very vain and wants to shine itself. So different place to try to understand this phenomenon. When the reflecting medium, the subtle body, when the reflecting medium comes into play, originates, the reflect consciousness comes into play. So Ishwara is doing its job there, and then the moment that there is a mirror-like reflector, and then consciousness somehow shines or reflects. Science talks about the origination of reflected consciousness without understanding what is reflect consciousness. They believe that it is consciousness, and they are looking for consciousness. They are believing that consciousness is coming out of the body or from a different angle, more psychological, coming out of the mind. So that is the mistake of science, whereas Vedanta talks about the eternity of consciousness and the time-bound origination of the mind. The original consciousness does not fall under the domain of science because the scientific instruments are not designed to start OC, original consciousness. So there are no instruments, it's impossible. And the investigator, the scientists themselves, they never consider, they never bring this the force principle or the satya principle, the observer, and begin to analyze, to understand what is the observer, the absolute investigator there. So they want to find consciousness coming out of matter. So there are no instruments. They were never going to get to this God person, God. How you say? God particle. Sorry, they were never going to get to God particle because they are the God particle, but they don't understand that. It is that light of consciousness from which everything comes. Original consciousness cannot be known, but it can be known. It cannot be known, but can be known with the aid of the scriptures, and the scriptures coming from consciousness itself. It can be known with the help of consciousness. And it shows us the saving, how you say, with the boat collapse in the sea, they send this, the saving, forgot. To rescue people from the ocean of samsara. What is that saying? You think that people to hold?
It's a lifesaver.
Yeah, lifesavers, or jackets or things like that. It shows the scriptures, to try to help some of us to survive samsara, because samsara consumes everyone. Consciousness is prior to creation. We know that consciousness is never destroyed. In the Maitreya Brahmanam of the Drg Upanishad, it said that even if the whole creation is destroyed, only the reflect consciousness is destroyed. How nice, huh? If the entire world is destroyed, it means to say that the reflected consciousness and the macrocosmic reflecting media was destroyed. But since in matter, in the world of phenomenality, nothing is destroyed, so it's not really destroyed. Everything shrinks back into its potential form, seed, condition, to come back again when circumstances are right. In this important session of the Upanishad, the original and the reflect consciousness are differentiated. So we need to understand the difference in which way original consciousness and reflected consciousness are different. Okay, the reflect consciousness is bound by time. It's under the power of Maya. Original consciousness is beyond time and space and Maya. In which way are the same, we need to understand as well. In which way they are different. Original consciousness is free and independent of reflect consciousness and the reflecting medium. Reflect consciousness is dependent on the reflect medium produced by Maheshwara, and Maheshwara is dependent on original consciousness. We need to understand in which way they are different and in which way they are the same. Consciousness does not die when the medium dies. Consciousness does not expand or increase or becomes better or worse, but the medium dies so, and the reflect consciousness is going to affect by the condition of the medium, as we know. It does not contract or decrease in size. Consciousness does not contract and decrease in size. Consciousness does not have dimension or size like any object in space that's subject to expansion and contraction. Thus, consciousness is not limited by space, it's beyond space. That's what it means. Yeah? So it says, yeah, it says everything we need to know about us, our true nature, so we can live in peace and without fear of anything, because we are beyond anything that come and go. Not limited by space. Okay. Okay, we stop here today. And we meet again next Wednesday. No, next Thursday. Now we meet again next Monday with Panchadas, and next Thursday with Drg Drsya. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Thank you, Lord. Thank you, my dear friends. We meet again soon, next Monday. Arrivederci.
Arrivederci.
Much love.
Thanks, Arlindo. Bye now.
Bye.